What's up, friends? It's Endymion, and lately I've been playing the Dead Space remake, as I'm sure many other people are doing too, and man, is it good. I know comparing Dead Space to open world games and other modern games may seem unfair, but playing it truly makes me think that the AAA industry desperately needs more quality over the same big empty open worlds and other nonsense that we've grown so accustomed to. So what can we learn from Dead Space and others like it, and why is it still refreshing and timeless so many years later? Dead Space originally released in 2008, which was a time where actual level design and quality mattered more over things like battle royales or how big your map is. It was originally conceived as a science fiction space horror version of Resident Evil 4, and the team at Visceral did an amazing job realizing that potential. This new Dead Space, which is a remake by Motive, just further solidifies why this game is a timeless classic. And hopefully it does well enough that EA also remakes Dead Space 2 and then completely forgets that Dead Space 3 even exists and just makes a new entry to replace it. Honestly, the one thing that's baffling me more than anything else while playing the remake is how refreshing and innovative it feels, especially in the gaming landscape of today. Most AAA games these days are just giant empty worlds full of the same repetitive activities strewn across maps so large you could probably fit thousands of entire dead spaces within them, yet never meet even an inch of the quality of that experience in today's games. Another thing I'm loving is how Dead Space is just a straight up action survival horror game. Too many games these days have shoehorned in RPG elements when they don't need it. It's why games like Gotham Knights are so disappointing. Because why is a random thug taking forever to knock out by a crime fighter who's dedicated their entire life to honing their body? But the level above their head is higher than mine, so it takes longer? It's stupid, but that's how many games are these days. But in Dead Space, while there are still parameters that dictate what does more damage when you upgrade, all of that modern nonsense we're used to is just thrown to the wayside. You see an enemy? Just shoot it, blast its limbs off, or use a telekinetic buzzsaw to make lasagna with its face. It's so refreshing to not have multiple currencies, constant damage numbers showing when I hit an enemy, or having a big world that feels lifeless and huge for no reason. It's become a trend in the past few years to take a franchise and then make it open world. Even Pokemon did it, which resulted in a technical mess of a game full of empty fields and canyons. While that freedom is nice, it came at the cost of true level design. That entire game just felt like a big field you ran around aimlessly in until you did the story objectives. I get why games do open worlds, but there has to be a middle ground where games are open but still have actual game design to them. While big maps are good to an extent, Dead Space proves that size really isn't everything. Or at least that's what my wife tells me every time before her boyfriend picks her up. What's crazy about Dead Space is how ridiculously detailed and refined it all is. In most modern games, I couldn't even tell you a single side quest I've done, or the level layout, since today's games are so big yet offer little reason to remember their worlds. I think what Dead Space has proven to me is that it's kind of like Bloodborne in the sense that it's a game that I actually want to replay more than once. What I love about this era of gaming, and I'm talking like 2007 to 2015 specifically, is that there was actual effort being done to make games that were memorable and not just gloating about how many hours it will take you to beat it like Dying Light 2's promotions did. I'm absolutely sure too that many of you watching this could mentally map out the entire level layouts of games like Bloodborne or Dark Souls to an insane degree. It's not that those worlds are small, but that their Metroidvania level design and attention to detail force you to learn its layout in order to survive. Yet when I play Forspoken, for example, I already couldn't tell you what that game's level layout is like, and that game just came out. Games these days are too big, and they lack any polish that is found in the smaller yet much more quality refined experiences like Dead Space. What I love about level design like Bloodborne or Dead Space is how they use their levels in more ways than one. For example, early on in Dead Space when you're entering the Ishimura, it's a simple straight corridor. But later on, once new gameplay mechanics are introduced, it becomes a contained playground that alters your perspective on what level design can really be. When I'm playing open world games these days like Forspoken or even Horizon Forbidden West, while they may look pretty, their worlds are just big for bigness sake. This is why I've replayed games like Bloodborne or Dark Souls to an unhealthy degree, because not only are they fun, they're designed so that it rewards and promotes repeated playthroughs. Things like New Game Plus are nothing new, and it's thanks to its implementation into gaming by the legendary Chrono Trigger, which created New Game Plus as a concept. It's been largely adapted into many of today's games, and for good reason. However, even when games like Horizon or God of War have New Game Plus, they don't make me want to replay them. In Horizon, Forspoken, or really most open world games, New Game Plus sounds like a nightmare because the worlds are too big and I know it'll take forever to get to the good stuff. In God of War's case, its level design is more contained, which is great, but it also ruins New Game Plus as a concept because all the cutscenes are unskippable. And especially in Ragnarok's case, that game pulls control from you so often to force you into storytime mode that you'd have to pay me to play that game again. Dead Space, of course, has some forced cutscenes too, but they're not nearly as frequent, and I was astounded by how much game there was to be had in it. I did beat Dead Space when it originally launched too, but it's been well over like 50 years since it released, so I'd forgotten stuff thanks to the brain rot of today's modern world. So coming back to it was like eating a meal in a restaurant that reminded me of happier times, if those happier times involved infected crew members and flesh walls. It's as if I almost forgot what it was like to enjoy a game that wasn't the size of an entire country, but with the depth of a puddle. Of course, this doesn't mean there aren't modern games that are also huge that don't offer great depth as well as length. The obvious pick is Elden Ring, which is absolutely massive, but does something that most other open world games don't do, which is still have actual level design dungeons amidst the open world. It's the complete opposite of Forspoken, because as I was reaching the first major boss in that game, you have to enter her realm through this gateway. And I was hoping that once you go through it, it would be a more concise level layout with, actual level design. But unfortunately, once you dive in, it's just the same as what's come before, just now it's more red and spiky. But eventually you do reach the boss's castle, and yet again I had that feeling, hoping that finally I'd have a real level to explore. You then enter the castle, go through a small foyer, up some stairs, through a hallway, into the boss's room, and that's it. Then you're thrown back into the massive open world, and it's disappointing. Elden Ring, on the other hand, is like the most near-perfect fusion of games like Horizon or Forspoken, but with the level design of Dark Souls or Dead Space. Mind you, I still think Elden Ring is a little too big for my tastes, and I still much prefer games like Bloodborne or Dark Souls over it. But regardless, what is here is still miles and leagues ahead of anything in its genre today. Elden Ring is great because it has those classic legacy dungeons like Stormvale, Raya Lucaria, and open world zones like the entirety of Florida. But without those massive legacy dungeons, the game is still compelling because it's littered in smaller dungeons, surprise boss fights, and general terror in any direction. But when you look at Elden Ring's world, it too is kind of like Forspoken in the sense that there really is only one safe town, and the rest is just a big hostile environment full of enemies and not much else. But the difference between Elden Ring's world and Forspoken's is that at least in Elden Ring's case, I can actually stumble across dungeons with actual level layouts that feel as if a real human hand created them instead of what feels like AI-generated landscapes in Forspoken's case. Really, when it comes to open world games, there's probably three in particular that I think do it right for me. First is Elden Ring, of course, then there's Skyrim, which again has actual dungeons, cities, and so on, which is amazing. And then there's, of course, The Witcher 3. To be honest, even Witcher suffers from the open world syndrome because it has repetitive tasks like monster nests or bandit camps all over its map. But at least the devs support those activities with amazing attention to detail and a major emphasis on story and character. Not to mention that Witcher 3's world feels alive and real with places like Novigrad, which you could spend hours in just combing that city for quests, items, and playing hours of Gwent. God, I love Gwent. I guess what I'm getting at is that the reason why Dead Space has resonated with me so much is because it embraces things that feel lost in the modern AAA world these days. Everything is so concerned with being massive, and let's be real, what's usually the first thing players ask these days when a new game is coming out? It's not just the quality, they also want to know how long the game is too. Because there's this bizarre fascination with quantifying how many hours a game is to whether a game is worth full price or not. Dead Space is not a long game. You could easily beat the whole thing in 10 hours or less, yet it's absolutely worth full price over any of these modern open world games, even if they are 6 or 8 times its length. Yet players have this brain rot festering in their heads telling them that every dollar spent on a game should equate to at least 1 hour of enjoyment, which is insane to me. I'd much rather play something that's replayable and offers unique gameplay like Dead Space over Forspoken, Horizon, or really any of these modern games. I know the one argument is that not everyone can afford every game, but ask yourself, are you really having more fun with a game that makes you do the same thing over and over again ad nauseum, over a game that will truly stick with you? Is that really the direction we want gaming to go in? Like I said before, many people can perfectly map out the entire level layout of Dark Souls in their head. Like, I could confidently map out Bloodborne's levels pretty well because of how good that game's design is. But if you put a gun to my head and told me to map out Assassin's Creed Valhalla's map, just tell my mom I love her and pull the trigger, cause there's no way I'll remember any of that. Look, I'm not saying that games like Valhalla or Forspoken can't exist. I know there's plenty of people out there who enjoy those kinds of games, and I do too to some extent as well. There's nothing wrong with enjoying things that others find terrible, like sometimes you can watch a really bad movie but find enjoyment in how awful it is. But Dead Space has really opened my eyes to the realization that the games of today are not offering truly meaningful or memorable experiences. Well, in the AAA landscape anyway. Thankfully, at least, it seems that modern gaming to some extent is going to stray away from the open world syndrome and go back to making actual games with real level design again. It was reported that Final Fantasy XVI as well as Final Fantasy VII Rebirth will have open world-like levels, but they won't be like Forspoken. Instead, the game's world will be segmented into smaller regions that are still open while still having the quality of actual human hands making compelling levels. We also have the imminently releasing Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which is inspired heavily by games like Dark Souls. And it's looking like it too will have intricately designed levels, and I can't wait to play that game. Open world games are of course going to stay a norm in the world of gaming, I accept that. And it didn't really take off in an explosive way until The Witcher 3 came out and dragged its nuts across the industry, and it looks like we're having that second explosion with Elden Ring. Even the creator of The Last of Us, Neil Druckmann, said he sees Elden Ring inspiring the industry in the future. Neil said, quote, "I'm more recently intrigued by stuff like Elden Ring and Inside that doesn't rely as much on traditional narrative to tell its story. I think some of the best storytelling in The Last of Us, a lot of it is in the cinematics, but a lot of it is in gameplay and moving around a space and understanding a history of a space by just looking at it and examining it. And to me right now is some of the best joy I get out of games that trust their audience to figure things out, that don't hold their hand. That's the stuff I'm really intrigued by going forward." End quote. So even the Druckmaster believes that Elden Ring will become the new industry standard for game design, and honestly that makes me happy. I think games like Dead Space, Bloodborne, or Elden Ring really do show that the best kind of game design is when the experience is crafted in such a way to promote memorization. It's why I love Dead Space so much. I love how the game starts off very linear, but eventually you'll gain access to fast travel. And this transit system allows you to then reach previous levels, and once you've gained new security passes, you can then start opening up the entirety of the Ishimura and really start to appreciate how much love and care went into every part of that game. I really do hope that the path the game industry goes down is less relying on massive open spaces and more on actually making games that feel fun to explore and dissect. This is why I can't wait for the remake of Resident Evil 4, because that game's level design and structure is amazing and it's full of crazy stuff. It's also why games like Dark Souls took the entire world by storm. Some may argue that Dark Souls is sort of open world, but it isn't. It has more in common with Dead Space than it does any open world game. It's the same with Bloodborne. The reason why those games are so compelling to explore is because every level was designed for specific moments or encounters. It's why it leads to surprise moments like getting pulled by a tentacle in Dead Space and having to blast it away before you're turned into human sushi. Or returning to areas in Bloodborne and finding out there's giant cosmic alien spider things who have been there the entire time but you lack the insight. I just hope that the direction gaming goes in is less about offering big empty worlds full of bandit camps, and more about making games that I genuinely want to play through more than once that actually give reason to engage besides cleaning up a map from icons. This is why Dead Space releasing when it did is so important. It shows not only that the game is timeless, but that the AAA industry is lacking when it comes to making truly unique games that players actually want to engage with. I think my taste in gaming is somewhat returning to its roots, where I'm becoming less interested in big games and finding far more enjoyment in smaller ones that have more meat than fat on the bone. Evil West is a good example of this. It's a linear action-adventure game, but I love it. Games like Mass Effect or BioShock by today's standards would be considered small, yet I would argue they're infinitely better than 99% of the games that come out today anyway. Dead Space has proven to me that the quality of what many AAA modern games reach for today are just not what excite me about games anymore. The fact Dead Space has returned where everything is so heavily monetized with live service models, massive maps, and daily quests is important. It's just oozing with quality, detail, and offers something that is completely unique and far more relevant and interesting than what's trendy today. Like I said, open world games are not awful. Well, not all of them. But I guess in the end, Dead Space really did prove to me anyway that what really matters isn't the size of your world or the girth of your content, but how you use it. Sometimes bigger isn't always better, and maybe when it comes to gaming, that's what I'm looking for these days. I'm tired of cleaning up massive open worlds, of live services, and of games wasting my time with the same crap over and over again. Games like Dead Space remind me that gaming used to be simple yet effective. And like Bloodborne and Dark Souls, Dead Space truly does prove that it isn't your size that matters, but how you use it.